AC, as we make our continued escape from Hammerland, uh, I'm starting to wonder, is this a mistake? Should we just stay in Hammerland? Because these movies that we're doing, we're kind of clearing out the stuff we haven't watched.
Right.
I feel like, is this really it? Is there more to explore? Because for the let's get this over with year, as I'm kind of thinking of it, I'm really enjoying what we're watching, and the surprises keep on coming. This isn't the oh, this is all last gasp stuff. And if you're just a completist, you want to talk about it. I'm really enjoying this stuff. And this month's movie is no exception. We're talking about The Phantom of the Opera from 1962, directed by Terence Fisher, our Hammerland MVP. And I'm excited to talk about this one. But first of all, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. And yeah, I am also excited about this one, and I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying our slow fade, as it were. I'm deliberately, trying not to put the Drek in front of you, um, but I think this and Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll are kind of the lesser celebrated Gothics. Both were directed by Terence Fisher, and both are handsomely produced. Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, as we discussed a couple months ago, was not a big hit, and so there's a bit of a paring down for this one. Although this is still pretty lavish by Hammer standards. I want to say Hammer's Dracula was made for about 90,000 pounds, and this one was like 170,000 pounds. So it's considerable bump up. Their budgets kept increasing as their fame grew. But this one is another one that they are borrowing from the Universal stable. This was famous with Lon Chaney Sr. in 1925, celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, the original. And then they redid it, I think, in 1943 with Claude Rains in the Phantom role.
And I've got a confession to make. I have seen neither.
Have you seen any Phantom of the Operas before, or is this your first?
This is my first time experiencing anything Phantom related, I think, outside of just general pop culture. I realized when the movie started, I thought to myself, I don't know anything about what this story is, except for the famous scene from the movie where he's playing and he's got the basket, she rips it off and he goes, ah!
Right.
That's about it. I know they did there've been tons of remakes, probably Simpsons parodies. There was a movie called The Phantom of the Mall.
Yep.
Back in the 80s. But yeah, this was a new experience for me. So I'm curious to find out how this one tracks with I guess the more popular, like Universal or classic Phantom story, because I was surprised by a lot of what I saw. I was surprised by how modern this story is. I almost couldn't believe what I was watching. We'll get into all of that, but
Great.
let me start off by asking, you've seen, the Phantom.
Yes.
You've probably seen many iterations of it, I assume. How does this story line up? Or is this another Hammer trying to do its own thing and really doing its own thing?
I would say it is a little of both. It has the basic structure in that we have a young opera singer, Christine, who is being kind of coached, mentored by the Phantom. The Phantom is wants to make sure that he is an integral part of her ascension to stardom. So those two things, definitely the idea of a haunted opera house, and that's where things start to deviate is, the background of the Phantom changes from film to film. It's very similar between the 1943 Universal, Claude Rains and Herbert Lom, because it has a composer whose music is stolen, and he's creating his revenge based on that. So yeah, as things went on, you had a version with Robert Englund in the 80s. You had Dario Argento had one in the 90s. There's, of course, the adaptation of the stage musical with Gerard Butler. So there's a lot of different Phantoms to choose from. I really do enjoy the silent film, just because of Chaney's iconic performance, and it really is an amazing performance unto itself. I think one of the things that kind of plays against Phantom of the Opera for horror fans is the very nature of the fact that it is very much a musical, And so there's a lot of music surrounding it and numbers and things like that. And there may be a lot of folks who are like, get on with the monster movie stuff. And, but I mean, that's just kind of the nature, like that's the setting. And so therefore they're going to give some time to the music.
This isn't a monster movie, at least this version of
Right.
it. And it was one of those deals where I was very surprised by the end, pleasantly surprised. But I also was curious, like, how did this end up being a Hammer movie? Maybe I should have been surprised, because when we talked about Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll last time, I was marveling at the fact that it was all inside the actor's head and the way he brought out the dueling personalities physically without resorting to, you know, a whole bunch of like crazy fright makeup. He just went from an old hobo looking guy to a dashingly handsome man who was the monster, as a great reversal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In this movie, spoiler alert, we don't see the, I guess, grotesquerie of the Phantom's disfigurement until the very final scene. They do a great job of teasing, like other people see what's behind the mask, but we don't. And it becomes one of those things like, oh, is this going to be just, we'll never know what he looks like. And we find out, but it's very quick kind of glimpses. And also the Phantom not being a monster create a bit of a point of confusion to me, because there is at least one murder in the film. The I don't know, the stagehand with the guy who ends up, you know, swinging out on the noose from behind the ripped bit of set. What was that all about?
I think that was to show, well, it was to cause the opera to close. I think, you know, again, this is a Phantom with a private axe to grind against our Lord Darcy character played by Michael Gough. And this is a way to, you know, make sure the show closes. And so, you know, there will be no success for Lord Darcy. So I think that's probably what that was. Why he doesn't just kill Lord Darcy, I don't know. Why some poor stagehand had to take the hit, I don't know.
It is, oh my gosh. Now that I'm stepping back and thinking about it, all these problems are pouring in, like you're mentioning. Why not just kill him? And I'm thinking, well, maybe he just wanted to publicly humiliate him. But at the end of the film, again, spoilers, I'm not going to bother putting in the banner, because this movie deserves to be seen. Even if you know everything that happens, it's still a great kind of treat. But at the end, another surprise, Lord Darcy, our horrible, irascible, snobbish, lecherous villain, gets away. He confronts the Phantom, or the Phantom confronts him and reveals his face, which we don't see. And Lord Darcy just kind of like screams and runs out the door. There's no like him coming back with a knife or falling to his death. That happens to sort of to someone else.
Right.
It was a very big surprise. So I don't know what the Phantom's ultimate goal was and what his long game was, except I'm going to hang out here and wait for a starlet whom I can groom and help make into a stage presence, hoping that Darcy will quit his own production so I can put on my show, which is just Joan of Arc. And I don't know what his plan would be after he survived. It's very confusing, but in the moment, I was just swept up in the story.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I think it is one of those, when it's over, you start going, well, how come? I do find that ending pretty unsatisfying. Like, we really do want to see Lord Darcy get his, and he doesn't. And you're like, well, you know, now I was listening to the commentary on the Shout Factory Blu-ray, which features Nathaniel Thompson and Troy Howarth, who's been a guest on our Giallo show. And they were positing the theory, and I like this, that Lord Darcy backs out of the room where our Phantom is. He is pursued by the dwarf, and the dwarf kills him, the dwarf being our Phantom sidekick, that the dwarf does the dirty work. And then the cops are all chasing after the dwarf to catch him. And that's why they are not at the opera, and allows the scene to play out as it is. That, you know, like there's nobody there to stop the Phantom because they're all off chasing the dwarf who's just murdered Lord Darcy. I think it's a lovely theory. There's nothing in the film to support that.
I was going to say, I think I looked away for a minute during the climax, but I'm pretty sure I didn't miss that.
None of that happened.
No. I would have liked to have seen that.
And again, I think the ending is a little weak. As you say, we don't really get a glimpse of our monster, such as the Phantom is. And really, he's a very sympathetic character. You know, he's somebody who was burned in a fire when his music was wrongfully published under Lord Darcy's name. And so he goes and tries to destroy it. And, the fire gets out of control. And so he's burned horribly and spends the rest of his time, living in the underbelly of the opera house. And we do get a brief reveal of him at the very end, as you said. But the majority of the time, he is hidden behind that mask. And I think this is a good time to talk about there have been different masks used throughout different Phantom of the Operas. The one from the Lon Chaney version is kind of a Red Death skull mask at times. The one from the Claude Rains version is kind of that classic, masquerade across the eyes.
Like with the little kind of half.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Which is the one that we see, later adopted for the big stage musical, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical.
Mm-hmm.
But this one was one that Roy Ashton is our makeup guy. And he put forth a bunch of different mask designs, none of which were pleasing Terence Fisher, our director. And so this was literally made up on the day in terms of the creation of the form fitting and then just a little bit across one of the eyes. And all that said, I think it's a really effective mask. It looks both human and inhuman. And we recognize that there's damage that's been done to this person. This is a person who has incurred some damage. And this mask is not just for concealing identity. It's for, concealing the damage beneath it.
Yeah. And it is odd to think about because it's sort of revealed to us in pieces. There's the dramatic, really cool close-up in the opening credits. He's playing the organ, and then we go to a sort of a mid-range close-up of his eyes, and then it keeps kind of like fading and zooming as the different credits come up, and it looks great. And then you gradually realize that he's got these two like little nose holes, and then the rest there. I don't think there's any mouth holes in the mask, which is kind of it's a choice. It looks like a weird, I believe when you say that it was made up on the spot, because it looks like some bizarre paper mache thing. It almost looks like there's a scar stitched across the top of it.
Yeah.
It's truly bizarre, and it looks great in the darkness, when he is kind of revealing himself gradually to our Christine on the stairs. It's a nice effect. I will say, and I have to bring up this reference because we're talking on a show. It reminded me Friday the 13th, Jason Lives, the ending shot of him under the water and the close up and his eye just goes, it's just the one eye. And he famously had one eye kind of missing. There's also, I'm going to bring in a Halloween reference because when in the flashback, when our Phantom is horribly burned, he's burned by the acid, not so much the fire, because he thinks he's throwing water on the fire, but it turns out to be hydrochloric acid or something. He stumbles out into the street and falls into the river, and then kind of like gets washed along into the sewer and is picked up by our as we call him, a dwarf. I think he was like homeless and living in the sewers or something.
Yeah.
Very reminiscent of what happened to Michael Myers at the beginning of that one of those awful sequels.
I was going to say it's also similar to what happens to Vincent Price in Theater of Blood, when he takes his dive and ends up in the underbelly.
Also, Jack Napier in Tim Burton's Batman. Also, and this is, I could not get this comparison out of my head because I'm pretty sure Tim Burton is a huge fan of this movie. Batman Returns. The whole idea of the Penguin's lair, it looks very much like that, with the giant kind of pool that leads up into this kind of rocky formation, mountainous, cavern where he does all of his, plotting and scheming. The bars of the sewer. It reminds me of so much of Tim Burton. And I don't know how much of this was constructed versus found and constructed, but my gosh, the money they poured into this movie, it was mostly, I think, in terms of costuming and sets, because this thing looks amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is really coming at the, having had some great movies like the, Curse of Frankenstein, Revenge of Frankenstein, Dracula, both the Horror of Dracula and the Brides of Dracula. They'd had the Mummy by then. They'd had Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. They'd had Curse of the Werewolf. So like this really was the next, like if they're going through the list of Universal classics, like, well, we got to do a Phantom of the Opera. And I think it's a really handsome presentation. I mean, like the sets, of course, are looking fantastic. The costumes are great. I mean, it really is set up as kind of a prestige film. I don't know if you know anything about kind of its origin story.
I had never seen a Phantom movie, so the odds of me knowing about it.
Well, in terms of like how this film came to Hammer, Cary Grant apparently was because Hammer's star was on the rise. Cary Grant said that he was interested in appearing in one of Hammer's films, and this seemed to be a good fit for him. He would probably play the Edward D'Souza character, the kind of the friendly and likable lead. But then when he didn't end up doing it, the wheels were already turning. And so they got Herbert Lom, who had been on screen for 25 years. And he had recently done things like The Lady Killers with Alec Guinness, War and Peace, Spartacus. And suddenly he was the name, and they put him, the face behind the mask, but the name above the title. But that's how that came to be, was that Cary Grant was supposedly looking to I don't know, maybe not necessarily roughing up his nice guy image, but certainly looking to kind of expand the genres that he appeared in.
So he would have been our hero, is what you're saying, that Harry Hunter?
That's correct.
Yeah. No, I like Cary Grant, but one of the things I dug about this movie is I didn't recognize a whole lot of people in it. And I think having that distracting star quality, maybe it would have worked, because the expectation of what our leading man does in this movie, I think, is completely subverted in a good way. But I think that would have stuck an expectation in audiences' heads. So if it was this script, I think getting the end of this movie and having Cary Grant not be as heroic would have been kind of a problem. Although now I want to visit the alternate universe where that happened and see watch the
what you think. Right.
Gosh, his girl Phantom. But no, I want to talk about that. Okay, so the movie opens with a different leading lady, Maria, I think, right? And she quits the production when, as we mentioned, there's a body that comes swinging out from a noose, closes down the production. Our Lord Darcy, a great villainous turn by Michael Gough, which, man, he's just so wonderful in this movie.
Well, and when you juxtapose this with his appearance in Horror of Dracula, like where he's just kind of the milquetoast, brother, like it's just watching him kind of like if you're only familiar with his Hammer efforts, but by this point he'd already done some things with oh shoot, I'm blanking on his name, but it'll come to me. But things like Murders in the Horror of the Black Museum, Conga. And he would later go on to do things like Trog, but like he really does that flamboyant villain turn quite well, which you would not have known if you only knew him from Horror of Dracula.
Well, I didn't know him much from that outside of that and Batman,
sure.
Right? So to see him playing this villain and doing it so well, there's nothing redeemable about him, but he still doesn't come across as quite a cartoon character. He feels just like a very human, jagoff. But
Herman Cohen is the director producer that was doing those other films I was referencing.
Okay. But what I liked about the lead up to the body coming to swing out is all the little bits of sabotage. You've got someone has slashed the poster. The orchestra is getting ready to load up to get ready to go onto the pit, I guess. Guy uncovers the drum, and the top of the drum has been slashed to ribbons. There's all this weird stuff going on. It's very Camp Crystal Lake. Sorry. And then the body comes out, and cut to our lead has left the production. And so Mr. Darcy needs to find someone else. Um, Mr. Hunter has started holding auditions already, and Darcy doesn't like that because he's the man in charge. And we meet our lovely Christine,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of surprising kind of sexual politics intrigue in this. And when I say it's a very modern film, like the entire point of this movie is, I feel like, to get her to be able to help realize her dreams through a network of very surprising supporting men.
Mm,
I'm
mm.
like, wait, this is 1962. I was, it's great. And even the way that Harry Hunter um, interacts with the Phantom at the end, because Christine gets kidnapped and taken into the lair where all he wants to do is teach her how to be a better performer.
Right.
And so when Hunter goes into the lair, you expect, okay, I found the girl. I'm going to fight it out with the Phantom and someone's going to die down here. But he offers them this sympathetic kind of hand because by then he's heard the origin story of this music teacher who was allegedly killed in a fire, but it turns out he was just disfigured, but no one understood what happened to him. And there was a separate story about the fiery incident at the printers, which, as you mentioned, was him trying to destroy the copies of his works that had been stolen by Darcy. And so when they finally meet, he's like, hey, I I
Yeah.
respect you. It's terrible what happened. Darcy's an asshole. What are you doing? How can how can we work together? I'm like, what movie am I watching? This is not a horror film, but I'm totally in for it.
Well, and what you say there, like we have our sleazy character, Michael Gough. But yes, the Phantom, basically what he's, I mean, one thing I also find a little frustrating is that, like, I'm not sure how long Christine's been kidnapped, but it seems like it's less than a day, right?
That's what yeah.
And it's like
It's
he's going
not
to
like
teach her how to be a master opera singer in 24 hours. Um, and basically, that primarily seems to be you must sing from the heart and sing it again and sing it again and sing it again. I don't really, I'm not quite sure what, magic he's imparting to her other than just, if you sing it right, I'll let you go.
well, he had heard her
Right.
voice from far below the theater in a cavern that's dripping with water, so he could tell exactly how to improve her performance and what was wrong with it. Again, let's stop
Yeah.
picking this apart because it's going to end up being a terrible movie by the end of this conversation. But no, I understand what you're saying about the time that she's been I guess kidnapped, but as far as him teaching her more, there is, I feel like, a significant time jump
Hmm.
from the discovery in the cavern to, I guess, opening night of the Joan of Arc
Right.
performance.
Right.
So I feel like maybe once she's been rescued, or they work out a deal where, like, hey, maybe you don't have to stay down here, but if you want to come down and visit, I can give you some music lessons.
Right. Well, and in the previous iterations, uh, she does go to him willingly. Like he offers to teach her, and she, goes, I will take your guidance. Here, she's literally kidnapped, and I'm like, I'm not sure how that works, but again, we're gonna have if we're gonna have some horror, we need to have our heroine kidnapped by the monster. It goes back to Creature from the Black Lagoon, or Dracula, or any of those.
True. And I feel like the inclusion of our henchmen, I feel like that's the excuse to, like,
Right.
raise the body count in this
Right.
movie, because I'm pretty sure that he's the one who strung up the dude from the noose who came
Yep.
flying out. He also, this was hard to watch. Um, Hunter and Christine encounter the rat catcher, who's
Yeah.
a guy coming through the theater catching rats, and he's very sweet. He's kind of
It's
scary
Patrick
look.
Troughton there. Did you recognize that's Patrick Troughton from Scars of Dracula and The Omen?
There you go.
Yep.
He had one of those. I know that face. I'll talk about who else I recognized, and I patted myself on the
There's
back.
some good people in this one.
Yes, but just don't let me forget about the carriage driver.
I
So
won't.
anyway,
Which one, by the way? Anyway.
the first one, but they encounter this guy, and he tries to show, hey, I've got these rats, and he's like, you want to see one? And he's digging through the bag, and Hunter's like, no, that's okay, because she's not having it, and he's like, you just go away, and he gives him some money and says, here's, for your troubles, because he offers to sell the dude a rat. I'm like, what are you gonna? He said, he'll make a nice pie. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. But then
Two like little puppies, he says.
but he takes his sack and he goes back into this other room, and then he is encountered by the henchman and stabbed through the eyeball.
Yep.
What, again, okay, why? Was he too close to the lair? There were the four ladies who were collecting. They're like cleaning up the trash, wherever they encounter. Right. Like, why didn't he attack any of them? I can understand if it was like you're getting too close to the lair or something like that, but right. He wasn't doing anything. There was no way he could be found.
Feels a little arbitrary, and as you say, I think it is just there to bump up the body count without making our Phantom look bad, because our Phantom needs to be our sympathetic character. So yeah, it feels like it's an interesting invention. By John Elder, screenwriter, aka Anthony Hines, and I think it works because it does exactly what we want to do. It gives us a higher body count, and it doesn't taint our sympathetic Phantom.
I don't know if this has been done in any of the iterations, but it would have been nice to see here is the Phantom is discovered in some capacity and gets a reputation for being a murderer because of all the work that his henchman has done, even though he is unaware of any of it. And he finds out that, yeah, this guy who nursed me back to health is actually a psychopath and he must be stopped through the power of my music.
Yeah. Well, this is the only one with a henchman. So this was their one chance to do it.
No, it's not. They can remake it and use my idea and cut us in for 25%.
Here we are with the 100th anniversary. It seems like the logical time to do it.
Very much so.
But yeah, kind of going along with the idea of Patrick Troughton, who had appeared in other Hammer films. We have quite the cast of familiar faces to Hammer fans. You can go ahead and mention your cab driver.
I was thoroughly confused, especially by the end of the movie, because the first cab driver, when I say cab driver, he's driving it's a horse-drawn carriage. It's Michael Ripper.
Yep.
Unmistakably Michael Ripper, even though he looked like he was buried under layers of grime and horrible like theater makeup.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, my first thought was, is that the Phantom? Is he disguising himself as a horse carriage driver to some nefarious end? And the answer is no. It's just Michael Ripper in a bizarre cameo.
That would have been delightful, but you're right. But yes, it's some of the weirdest makeup, because it really is like somebody shoved a bunch of crepe hair, beard and mustache on him for no real reason, considering his cameo. Like, you're not trying to hide him. He's not ever going to show up again.
Maybe that was it. Was he, we're in 1962. Would he have been recognizable enough to Hammer fans so that they're like, oh, he's got to play a bigger part in this than
probably. I mean, he did 33 films for Hammer. So, I'm certain that he he shows up in Quatermass 2. So
right.
That's, he's been in quite a few at this point.
But I guess what I'm getting at is he's had a varying degrees of types of roles.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point in 62, would there be an expectation where he can no longer play the background character or the random cab driver? People are going to be wondering, oh, when's he popping up again? What's his angle?
Right. I don't know, because again, they don't do anything with him. It must, it's like, well, Michael, get in here. We need to get you in this movie somehow. But the other cab driver, who's the kind of droll, heavyset gentleman who is very charming and funny, and when Harry and Christine are in the coach together and going around the park multiple times, that's Miles Mallison, and he appeared in quite a few Hammer films as well. I really like him in Brides of Dracula. But we also have our Mater D, Xavier at the club, which is also, that's the Sphinx setting from Two Faces for Dr. Jekyll. It's the same club.
Wow.
But Marnie Maitland, who plays our bad guy in The Reptile, That's where he plays Xavier, our maitre d, and of course we have Thorley Walters as our theater owner.
And he, I thought was pretty great, especially in the scene where they're auditioning
Yes.
Christine's replacement. And you've got Darcy sitting there. There's this lady, she's kind of got red hair, and she's up on the stage and she's singing a song from Der Fledermaus. And Darcy is totally into it and just like planning to like, okay, I'm gonna get her to come to my apartment for some extra, tutelage or something like that. And you can just see next to him just the disdain and like almost the eye rolling of like, oh, here we go again.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I love Thorley. Well, he's a little less kind of like fluffy and blustery than he is in, say, like Vampire Circus or Frankenstein Created Woman. But I'm always happy to see Thorley Walters show up.
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
Well, Edward D'Souza, who we haven't mentioned yet, he's the one who plays Harry, and he would show up the next year in Kiss of the Vampire, which we've talked about previously.
Again, I have like horrible amnesia when it comes to certain things, except for like Michael Ripper, apparently. But no, I really liked his presence, partially because of him as an actor. He's very kind of understated, very everyman, but largely because of the script. There's an early scene where Darcy takes Christine out to dinner and is very, very clearly propositioning her. She's not having it. He says, you're a delicious little thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, as he moves in closer, and he kind of propositions her into like, hey, let's go do some rehearsal. And she's like, well, the theater's closed. He said, well, my apartment's open.
Right.
And she kind of goes along with it. As they're leaving, she sees Harry Hunter coming in for a table of one. And she's like, we're about to go do some late night rehearsals. Would you want to join us? And he totally bails her out. Like, sure, I'd love to go. And what does Mr. Darcy do? He says, well, I'm not having this. And he leaves. And thus begins the budding relationship of our two young to-be lovers. And I got to say, this is a very romantic movie. I mean, I know it's about theater and opera and everything, but I really enjoyed watching the romance between these two leads.
Yeah. Well, and our actress playing Christine, who is Heather Sears, she was a pretty hot property. She was just coming off of Jack Clayton, who did The Innocents. He had done a film called Room at the Top, and she was prominent in that. And so this was quite a coup, and it's very kind of counter to what we normally expect from our Hammer women. Like she's kind of demure, and she's intelligent, and she's vulnerable, but she's also strong. So it's a really nice blend, and she doesn't wear a lot of kind of sexy, revealing clothes at any point.
No, and also kind of going along with that, there is the group of women who I guess they were also auditioning in that early scene with her, and she's clearly named as the favorite, and she goes backstage, and they're all like, oh, can I lend you this outfit? You're amazing. You're great. They're all just very supportive. There was none of that. I was expecting in this scene to be at least one kind of catty, jealous, like I'm going to get you and, whatever. But this is for several reasons. This movie surprised me very pleasantly.
Yeah.
But I'm not frustrated. I'm just baffled how this ended up being a Hammer movie. I guess it could only be a Hammer movie, but it's also not quite a Hammer movie.
Well, right. And I think it is kind of, and Universal did something similar when they did their iteration, is that it is very much kind of a classy with a quote monster lurking in the wings, literally. But it is very much about, the melodrama of, this poor actress and, her dreams to be on stage, and, the romance, and of course the songs, and it's worth pointing out that this is not, we don't get the music from our usual Hammer composer, James Bernard. Edwin Astley, who wrote the songs and wrote the score, He didn't do a ton else with Hammer or really in movies. He did a couple, Giant Behemoth and The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers. He's mostly known for television work. He did a 7-year run with The Saint TV show
Wow.
starring Roger Moore. But I think it's a perfectly serviceable score. But I do always wonder kind of what James Bernard might have done with it, with the big brass and booming strings and all that.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, I like the score. I think it was, it was fine. But just overall, when we get to the big Joan of Arc production that kind of closes out the movie, I thought, I wish that I could have seen this in a movie theater.
Mm.
Not just a movie theater like a multiplex, but this has Movie Palace written all over it. Maybe it helps that I just watched Amadeus last month for the first time, and that's another movie that I was not expecting, and I love. It's one of my favorite
Oh,
movies.
good.
But that's another, intrigue at the opera, and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. But this movie feels big and grand. There's just as much invested in putting on a realistic opera with an orchestra.
Yep.
And I love that the curtains coming down just at the end as the as the body tumbles to the floor, or to the ground, crushed under the chandelier. But there's just as much attention to detail in that as there is in the Phantom's Lair. It shows that they're not just making a horror movie where Hammer is known for like their big castles, and of course Frankenstein's increasing elaborate and weird laboratories. Fisher and company cared about every aspect of this production, and it feels big and grand, even though the story is ultimately very intimate.
Yeah. I don't want to pick on this movie too much.
Oh,
but
no.
Considering we have, I mean, like the unmasking of Lon Chaney Jr., again, you've never seen the movie, but you've seen that scene.
Mm-hmm.
And that unmasking scene is so iconic. And I feel like Hammer felt obliged to have an unmasking scene where we do get to see what is beneath the mask. But it feels really perfunctory to me in that, Herbert Lom takes the mask off to go swinging to save her. And it's like he's been jumping around and doing all sorts of things. He's proven himself quite nimble, quite agile with the mask. And so there's really no reason at all for him to take the mask off, other than the fact that, well, the audience has to see it. They have to see his face before the credits roll. And I wish, again, I mean, Michael Gough like tears it off of him. It's like, why didn't we get to see it there? That seems like the perfect time to see it. And instead we don't. We just see his reaction to it and him scurry away. But it's just the ending unmasking has always sat weird with me. I'm almost like, this feels like, well, quick, we're running out of movie here. You got to get his mask off.
Again, I asked you to stop it because
I'm sorry. It's just
no.
As a kid, I was like going, why did he do that?
Okay, let's go back and rewrite this. There's the possibility that you don't ever see him with the mask off. It's left to the imagination.
Sure.
Because we do get a rather cool flashback, and it's a flashback that is so good that even though it had been completely telegraphed in dialogue like a half hour earlier,
Yep.
by the time it comes around, you're not just thinking like, yeah, we know. It's the doing of it and the presentation of it.
I agree.
Part of the scene takes place outside the printer shop, and you see our Phantom, our Mr. Petrie, running into the shop and trying to explain to the printer what's going on. But that's from outside, and it's all score and no dialogue, which I feel like was a hearkening back to the silent, to the silent era where this movie had its roots. But I don't know that you needed to. So the point of that is when he burns himself with the acid, You see a tremendous performance, first of all, because it's not just fire. You see that when he recoils away and he's grabbing parts of his head, you're like, oh, that's because it's burning
Yeah.
into his skin
Yeah.
without a close up of like grotesque bubble effects, or whatever. It's all through performance, much like we saw with Dr. Jekyll last
Yep.
couple months ago. But we do see a quick shot, and it's kind of far away, of like red streaks down his face. You can see some of the scarring setting in. So I say, don't reveal it at all. Just have it be the mask, because yeah, you're going to get people kind of annoyed, like, we never got to see under the mask. But I feel like that same audience would be annoyed that it wasn't more of a body count monster movie in the first place, but it would have been thematically consistent. The other option is during the Michael Gough, Mr. Darcy reveal, you do a quick cut to his face. You
Yeah.
see what he sees, and
Yeah.
he runs screaming to really feel that impact, because at that point, if it were grotesque enough, I could see Darcy. There's no pursuit with the cops, none of that stuff. He
Yeah.
just goes insane.
He just, yeah, exactly. He just runs away and goes home to mom for the rest of his life.
Something like that. And then the next time we see the Phantom, he's up in that stage area, but he's put the mask back on,
Right.
and he doesn't need to take it off, because you're right. I didn't even think about this, but it's like he didn't take that mask off for himself or for Christine or anything. He took that mask off for the audience,
Yep.
which is a big mistake, because these people aren't supposed to realize they're in a movie.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it feels gratuitous. Again, I recognize that it's necessary, but considering they had a perfect opportunity earlier, I just wonder why they opted to, and maybe it was just that they were saving it for the end, but just it feels goofy at the end as opposed to it would have felt organic in the Darcy scene.
Well, yeah, but I
It
do.
doesn't ruin the movie for me, but it's just one of
No.
those things that's always felt a little odd.
Well, and that's been kind of the theme, I think, of this episode is, yeah, I think it's a pretty great movie until you think about it. But if you think about it too much, it might lower it in your estimation, which I think is unfair. I think it's a great production, but underscored by when we get the flashback with Herbert Lom as Professor
Professor Petrie, yeah.
Petrie. We see the whole bit where he goes to Darcy and asks, like, hey, can I sell you some of my songs, or I will sell you my entire 10 years worth of work because I'm broke and desperate. And the guy's like, I'll give you 50 pounds
Right.
for a decade's worth of work. And the guy's like, all right. And he said, come back tomorrow morning. I'll have the papers drawn up. And he says, I need rent. Could I get maybe an advance? And how much of an advance if we're talking about 50 pounds, I
Right,
don't know when
right.
this was set, but he probably could have pulled it out of his pocket. And he's like,
$5,
no.
$10, right.
Right. He's like, no, come back tomorrow. And you see him, I think he clutches his case, and you just feel like he wants to beat this guy over the head, but he also realizes the situation he's in. He's a completely sympathetic and, again, not cartoonish character. And when he happens upon the print shop and he sees that the works are coming out with Darcy's name on them instead of his, we assumes it's a mistake. He
Right.
doesn't get incensed. He goes in, he's like, can you please stop the press? This is wrong. There's been a misprint. And they're like, no, this is what we were told to do. And then that leads to the arson. And it's just that whole flashback, that mini 7-minute movie
Yeah.
is perfect. And I love that it's included in this film.
Well, and it's really the only chance we get to see Herbert Lom outside of the mask, considering he's the name above the title, we want to see his face. And we haven't even mentioned like some of the other things that Herbert Lom has done, but I imagine a lot of genre fans know him from The Dead Zone. He's Johnny Smith's psychiatrist, the kindly Sam Weizak.
Wow. I'd forgotten that.
And then he's also in all the Peter Sellers Inspector Clouseau movies, or at least a goodly majority of them. And he does kind of like do a spin on the going crazy in Pink Panther Strikes Again, I think. He basically becomes a Bond villain, which is hilarious. So I think Herbert Lom's just one of those great actors. On the Shot Factory Blu-ray, there's a little 15-minute featurette kind of celebrating his career. But I think he's terrific here, and you can see why they thought he could pull it off without, his face being revealed for the majority of the movie.
Right. And also I think that flashback comes at the perfect time, because it's
Right.
not long after that where we've got Hunter confronting him, and the audience,
Our
I think,
sympathies are with him, at that point.
right, but they're really with him because even in that flashback story, you kind of get the sense of like, well, yeah, something happened. But when we find out the depths of what that something was, like,
Right.
oh, this really makes it real and drives it home. I don't want to see something happen to this guy. And
Right.
I was almost angry that it's great that he died in a heroic act, but I'm like, again, you had another guy running out running out the door 10 minutes earlier who
Right.
much deserved to be under that chandelier.
Yeah. Right. And I just, again, why didn't we get that catharsis of seeing our villain, get his own? It just bumps me out.
And our murderous henchman
Yeah.
is
He doesn't,
he's hanging out. He's just like,
just like, well, you can see that he's sad about it. He's like, I did not mean to do that. I apologize.
right, but I mean, now that his boss is gone, is he gonna integrate into regular society, or is he gonna become Jack the Ripper? Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a sequel.
There you go. There you go. One more Jack the Ripper movie for Hammer.
When the chandelier first goes down, I thought it was gonna be a nice kind of poetic ending where the henchman and the Phantom were both going to die on that stage.
Right.
And
Right.
then when they cut to him swinging, like, oh, that sucks. I'm like, no, that sucks.
Yeah. It's like, because you're going to have to come down eventually.
Right in the loving arms of the police. But no, I mean, I think I'm glad we talked about
I'm
this.
really glad you enjoyed it too, because I mean, this is kind of like the last of the Gothics that we hadn't covered yet. So I was glad that both it and Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll went down well for you.
Well, me too. And I think we're about ready to leave it here. I don't recall what is next on the docket for, what is that, May? Oh my gosh, the year is a quarter over almost. How is
It's
that
true.
possible? But we're going to be back talking about something in a few weeks from now, and yeah, I can't wait for it as we continue our escape from Hammerland. But again, I'm not escaping willingly. I'm clawing. Like, can we just go back? I'll pay for the gas.
Would you like to know what we're going to be doing next?
Yes, because you're
Uh,
far more prepared than I am.
well, I did happen to pull it up while we were talking. X the Unknown, which is considered by many the kind of missing Quatermass movie, because it was written to be a Quatermass movie, and then Nigel Neal wouldn't give them permission for it to be a Quatermass movie, and so it became something else. But I like what it became.
All right. I think I've seen the other Quatermass.
You've seen all of them now at this point.
Yes, except for the unofficial. This is the Diamonds of Forever of the Quatermass franchise, right?
That's right. That's or the Never Say Never Again.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Oh man. Cool. Well, we'll be back talking about that. And yeah, AC, what do you have going on? Anything you want to promote or talk about?
We've had a really good run over at the Horror 101 with Dr. AC YouTube channel. We just did the Rocky Horror Picture Show 50th anniversary. We were talking about the Final Destination franchise, the Tremors franchise. And then one that I imagine you would enjoy is we talked about all the slashers that came out in the year 1980. So yeah, stop on by.
Yeah, I definitely got to check that one out. The Final Destination one, you couldn't have waited a few months. There's a new one coming out.
That was why we did it. That's why we did it. To get people excited about it.
Have you seen the trailer for the new one?
I have not. I tend to avoid trailers these days. So
I have.
What did you think? Is it a Final Destination movie?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where, was it the last one that ended on was it 9/11? Or no, it was the one where it kind of like looped around.
It looped around to where you found out that the last one was actually a prequel to the first one.
Yes. Was that the last one?
That was the Final Destination 5. Yeah.
Okay. Because I feel like they should have left it there. I loved that ending.
Yes.
It was one for the ages. And so now they've got Final Destination, and they call it Final Destination Bloodline. I'm like, did they learn nothing from Hellraiser 4? Come on.
Don't do it. Well, actually, Tremors 5 is called Bloodlines as well. So it's just, what are you going to do? You got to come up with bloodlines if you don't want to use numbers anymore.
That's a series you should do. All the Bloodlines movies. That's how you can cover Final Destination Bloodlines.
If you'll ride that train with me, I will do it.
We'll talk about it. But anyway, AC, thank you for joining me as always. Folks out there, if you like this show, please like and subscribe and all that business. Check out AC's show and his website, and all that information is down below. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much for joining us on our escape from Hammerland. More to come in May. So thanks and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.